The old man across the street never moved. That was the first thing I noticed about him. Every single night, he stood in the upstairs window of the house, directly facing mine, motionless, watching. At first, I thought he was just another lonely neighbor with insomnia. But after what happened during that summer, I stopped looking out my bedroom window after dark. I was 16 when we moved into the neighborhood. Maple Street looked like the safest place imaginable. Quiet suburban homes, perfect lawns, families walking dogs every evening. The kind of street where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Our house sat directly across from a tall grey home with faded shutters and overgrown hedges. The place looked older than every other house nearby. Not abandoned exactly, just forgotten. Mom told me an elderly man named Walter lived there alone. I remember seeing him the first night we moved in, standing upstairs behind the curtains, watching us unload boxes from the truck. At first, nothing about it seemed strange, until I noticed he never changed position. Hours passed while we unpacked. Every time I glanced toward the window, he stood there, same posture, same expression, perfectly still. Even Mom eventually noticed. "That guy gives me the creeps," she muttered quietly. Dad shrugged it off, probably just bored. But the next night, he was there again, and the next, and the next, always after dark, standing in the exact same upstairs window, watching the street silently. Sometimes he remained there until sunrise. I know because eventually I started checking. Every night before sleeping, I'd peek through my curtains, and every single time, Walter stared back from the darkness across the road, motionless. The weirdest part was his face. Even from that distance, something about it looked wrong. Too pale, too expressionless, like a mannequin pretending to be human. A few weeks later, things got worse. One night around midnight, I woke up thirsty and walked downstairs for water. While passing the living room window, I glanced outside automatically. Walter was still standing there, but this time, his window was open. The curtains moved slowly in the wind around him while he stood perfectly still in the darkness. Then suddenly, he lifted one arm and pointed directly at my house. Cold fear spread through me instantly. I backed away from the window and hurried upstairs without looking outside again. The next morning, I told Dad. He laughed. "You're freaking yourself out over some old guy." Maybe he was right, but deep down I knew something wasn't normal about Walter. Over the next month, I started noticing more strange things. His porch lights never turned on. No visitors ever came to the house, and during daytime, I never once saw him outside. Not once. It was like he only existed after dark. Then one Friday night, everything changed. My parents had gone out to dinner, leaving me home alone. Around 11 p.m., a thunderstorm rolled into the neighborhood. Rain hammered against the windows while lightning flashed constantly outside. I sat in my bedroom playing games when the power suddenly flickered. The room went dark for half a second. When the lights returned, I looked toward the window automatically. Walter stood closer than usual, not in his upstairs window, outside, across the street near our mailbox. Just standing there in the rain, staring directly at my bedroom. I froze instantly. The lightning flashed again. For one terrifying second, his face illuminated clearly. His skin looked almost grey. His eyes completely black in the darkness. Then the power went out entirely. Everything became pitch black. I stumbled toward my phone for the flashlight when suddenly someone whispered my name, very softly, outside my bedroom window. "Ethan!" My blood turned cold instantly. I slowly turned toward the glass. A silhouette stood inches outside the window screen, tall, motionless. Rainwater dripped down the figure's face while lightning flashed behind him. Walter, smiling. I screamed and stumbled backward onto the floor. Then the lights came back on. The window was empty. Nobody outside. I locked my bedroom door immediately and stayed awake until my parents came home. The next morning, Dad finally agreed to speak with Walter, mostly because Mom was disturbed after hearing what happened. I watched from the front porch while Dad walked across the street and knocked on Walter's door. Nobody answered. Dad knocked again harder. Still nothing. Finally, our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, walked outside looking confused. "What's going on?" she asked. Dad explained everything quickly. Mrs. Delaney's expression slowly changed. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Walter?" She frowned toward the house. "Honey, Walter died 3 years ago." Silence. Dad laughed awkwardly. "What?" "The old man who lived there," she continued quietly. "Heart attack. They never sold the house after he passed." I felt sick instantly. Dad looked genuinely shaken now. "But someone's been inside," he said. Mrs. Delaney slowly shook her head. "No, there hasn't. That evening, police checked the property. I watched from my bedroom while officers entered the house with flashlights. About 20 minutes later, they came back out. One officer spoke quietly with my parents outside. Then everyone kept glancing toward our house, toward my bedroom window. Later that night, Dad finally told me what they found. Dust covered everything inside the home. No food, no electricity, no signs anyone lived there. But upstairs, in the bedroom window facing my house, they found footprints in the dust, fresh footprints, standing directly in front of the window, facing my bedroom. After that, my parents kept the curtains closed constantly. Dad installed motion lights around the yard. Mom stopped letting me stay up late alone, but none of it changed the worst part. Because every night after midnight, Walter still appeared in the upstairs window, watching, motionless. Sometimes during storms, the window slowly opens by itself, and every once in a while, I still hear someone whisper my name outside the glass. The banging always started at 2:14 a.m. 3 loud hits from somewhere beneath the apartment floor. Bang, 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 every single night. At first, I thought it was pipes. Old buildings make noise constantly, especially cheap apartment complexes like ours. But pipes don't scream, and they definitely don't scratch at the walls. I moved into the apartment after my divorce. Small place, cheap rent, thin walls. Exactly what I could afford at the time. The building sat in the middle of downtown beside an abandoned laundromat and an empty parking garage nobody used anymore. From outside, the place looked depressing. Cracked windows, flickering hallway lights, water stains running down the walls. But I didn't care. I just wanted somewhere quiet to start over. Apartment 204 became that place, at least for the first week. Then the noises started. The first night, the banging woke me around 2:14 a.m. 3 loud impacts directly beneath my bedroom floor. Bang, bang, bang. I sat up immediately listening. At first, I assumed another tenant dropped something downstairs, but then came scratching. Long, dragging sounds beneath the floorboards. Scratch, slow, deliberate, moving underneath my apartment. I barely slept afterward. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to the neighbor across the hall while checking my mail. An older woman named Denise. The moment I described the noises, her expression tightened. "You hear it too," she whispered. Cold unease crept through me immediately. "What is it?" Denise glanced nervously toward the stairwell. "Nobody knows." That answer bothered me more than it should have. Later that evening, I spoke with the building manager, a tired man named Carl who smelled permanently like cigarettes. He barely looked up from his paperwork while I explained the noises. "Probably pipes," he muttered. "There's scratching under my floor." Carl sighed heavily. "There's no basement under your unit anyway." I frowned. "What? The lower level was sealed years ago after flooding damage." That made no sense, because the sounds clearly came from underneath the building. The next few nights got worse. The banging continued exactly at 2:14 every morning. Always 3 hits, always followed by scratching. Sometimes the sounds moved through the walls, too, like something crawling between the apartments. I started losing sleep fast. Then came the smell, rotting, sweet and sour at the same time. The odor spread slowly through the hallway, outside our units, until the entire floor smelled disgusting. People started complaining constantly. Carl blamed old plumbing, but nobody believed him anymore, especially after Mrs. Green from apartment 206 heard screaming. It happened around 3 a.m. one Thursday night. A woman screaming somewhere below the building. Not loud, muffled, like it came from underground. Police arrived briefly but left after finding nothing unusual. Still, everyone on our floor became nervous after that. The atmosphere inside the building changed completely. People stopped lingering in hallways. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Several tenants moved out within days, but the noises continued. Every night, 2:14 a.m., bang, bang, bang. Then scratching beneath the floor. One night, I finally decided to record the sounds. I placed my phone beside the bed before sleeping. At exactly 2:14, the banging started again, louder than ever. Bang, bang, bang. The floor beneath my bed actually vibrated slightly. Then came the scratching. Except this time, the sound moved upward inside the wall beside my bed. Scratch, slowly climbing higher. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand immediately. Then the scratching stopped directly beside my head. Silence filled the room, and suddenly, something whispered through the vent near my bed. "Help me!" I froze completely. The voice sounded weak, female, human. I backed away from the vent instantly. Then came another whisper, closer this time. "Please!" My chest tightened with panic. I grabbed my phone and called Carl immediately. No answer. The whispering continued through the vent. soft crying now mixed with scratching sounds somewhere inside the walls. Then suddenly, bang! A loud impact hit the vent from inside. Dust exploded outward across the room. I ran out of the apartment immediately. Several neighbors already stood in the hallway, frightened and confused. Everyone heard it. Then Denise pointed toward the floor near the stairwell. Water seeped slowly upward between the tiles. Dark water, mixed with something else. Blood. People started panicking instantly. Police arrived within minutes. This time, they searched the building properly, especially after officers noticed something strange in the basement utility room. A section of the concrete floor sounded hollow underneath. The workers broke through it around dawn, and that's when they found the hidden room. An underground chamber buried beneath the building. No windows, no electricity, no official entrance. Just a narrow tunnel hidden below the old basement floor. The smell pouring from inside nearly made officers vomit. The police never released full details publicly, but rumors spread fast among tenants afterward. Several human remains were discovered underground, old ones, and recent ones, along with chains attached to the walls. The investigation revealed something even worse. Years earlier, the building owner secretly used the underground space to imprison homeless women kidnapped from nearby streets. Nobody knew how long it continued, but according to police, someone had still been using the room recently. Carl disappeared the same night the hidden chamber was discovered. They never found him. I moved out immediately afterward. But before leaving, I listened to the recording from my phone one final time. The banging sounded clear, the scratching too. Then near the end of the audio, a woman's voice whispered from beneath the floor, very softly, "He's still down here." A second later, 3 loud bangs echoed through the recording again. Franz, I never once saw my neighbor sleep. Not once. At first it just seemed strange, then it became disturbing, and eventually terrifying. I moved into the duplex during late winter after taking a new job outside the city. The property sat at the end of a quiet suburban street surrounded by dead trees and empty yards. Half the duplex belonged to me. The other half belonged to a man named Adrian. At least that's what the landlord told me. He keeps to himself, she said while handing me the keys. That turned out to be an understatement. I met Adrian only once during my first week there, briefly. He opened his front door while I carried groceries inside. Tall, thin, extremely pale. The kind of pale that looked unhealthy. His eyes appeared dark from lack of sleep, and his movements felt strangely slow, almost delayed. "Hey," I said casually. Adrian stared at me for a second too long before answering. "Hello." His voice sounded dry, like someone who hadn't spoken in days. Then he stepped back inside and quietly closed the door. That was it. At first, nothing about him really bothered me. People are awkward. Some neighbors prefer privacy. But after living there for 2 weeks, I noticed something strange. His lights never turned off, ever. No matter what time I woke up, light glowed through Adrian's curtains. 2 a.m., 4 a.m., sunrise. Didn't matter. His house remained fully lit every single night. At first, I assumed he worked weird hours, but then I started noticing him standing at the window, watching outside, motionless, sometimes for hours. I'd wake up in the middle of the night for water and glance outside automatically, every time. Adrian stood near the living room curtains staring toward the street, perfectly still. One night around 3 a.m., I actually timed him, 47 minutes. He didn't move once, not even slightly. No blinking, no shifting posture, nothing, just standing there watching the darkness outside. That was when I started feeling uncomfortable. Then came the security footage. After someone stole packages from nearby houses, I installed a small camera above my front porch, mostly for peace of mind. A few nights later, I reviewed the footage after hearing noises outside. At first, everything looked normal. Empty yard, wind-moving branches, headlights occasionally passing down the street. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., Adrian appeared, standing directly outside my front door. My stomach tightened immediately. He wasn't moving, just staring at the camera silently. I watched the footage for almost 30 seconds before realizing something worse. Adrian never walked into frame. 1 second, the porch was empty. The next, he was simply there, like he appeared from nowhere. I replayed the clip repeatedly, trying to understand what I missed. Nothing changed, no footsteps, no movement, just empty porch. Then Adrian standing inches from my door. The footage became distorted around him too. Static flickered across the screen whenever he moved slightly. Eventually, he tilted his head slowly toward the camera. Then the video froze completely. The next morning, I confronted him, or at least I tried to. I knocked on his door several times. No answer. but I could hear movement inside. Slow footsteps crossing the floor, then silence. I gave up after a minute and walked back home. That night, the atmosphere inside the duplex felt different. Heavy somehow, like being watched constantly. Around midnight, I started hearing sounds through the shared wall between our homes. Soft scratching, scratch, followed by whispering, too muffled to understand clearly. At first, I assumed Adrian was talking on the phone, but the whispering never stopped. Hours passed while low voices murmured through the walls non-stop. Then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., my bedroom lights flickered once, the whispering stopped instantly, and someone knocked softly on my front door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I froze in bed listening. Another knock followed, then silence. I grabbed my phone and checked the security camera live feed. The porch stood empty. Nobody there. But then, movement appeared behind me on the screen reflection. I turned instantly toward my bedroom doorway. Nothing. When I looked back at the phone, Adrian stood on the porch camera again. Motionless. Watching. My heart started pounding. Then the camera glitched violently with static, and for one split second, the footage showed Adrian standing inside my hallway, behind my bedroom door. The image snapped back immediately afterward. Empty hallway again. I barely slept that night. The next morning I contacted the landlord asking about Adrian. The moment I mentioned his name, she went quiet. Then she said something strange. "That's impossible." Cold fear crawled through me instantly. "What?" The landlord hesitated, then quietly explained. Adrian stopped renting the duplex nearly 3 months earlier. "He disappeared suddenly," she said. "Police never found him." I laughed nervously. "That doesn't make sense. He still lives next door." "No," she whispered. "Nobody does." I felt sick immediately. The landlord agreed to meet me that afternoon. When she arrived, we walked together toward Adrian's side of the duplex. The front door was locked. Dust covered the porch untouched. But I knew someone was inside. I'd seen him, heard him. The landlord unlocked the door slowly. The smell hit us immediately. Rotting, damp, wrong. The house looked abandoned. Furniture covered in dust, cobwebs everywhere, no electricity running. Yet the strangest part was the bedroom. Every wall was covered in writing. Hundreds of sentences scratched directly into the paint. "He doesn't let me sleep," repeated over and over again, across every surface. The bed itself looked untouched for months. But beside the window, fresh footprints covered the dust, facing outward toward my house. Then the landlord noticed something else. The security camera monitor sitting unplugged in the corner, still displaying frozen footage on its screen. Footage of me sleeping in my bedroom, recorded from inside my house. We left immediately. Police searched the property later that evening. They never found Adrian. But officers did discover a hidden crawl space connecting both halves of the duplex through the walls, large enough for someone to move between the houses unnoticed. I moved out 2 days later. Before leaving, I checked my security camera one final time. The last recorded clip showed my empty porch at 3:12 a.m. Then slowly, a pale face leaned into frame from directly behind the camera, smiling without blinking. Fenfeltemmans. The old woman next door told me to lock my windows every night. Not because of burglars, not because of the neighborhood, but because, according to her, sometimes people get inside without you noticing. At the time, I thought she was paranoid. 3 weeks later, I found fingerprints above my bed. I moved into the house during early spring after getting accepted into nursing school. It wasn't a big place, just a small 2-story home at the end of a quiet street, with old trees and cracked sidewalks. The neighborhood seemed peaceful. Mostly elderly couples and families who kept to themselves. The only people I really spoke to were the neighbors next door, Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove, an elderly couple who spent most evenings sitting silently on their front porch watching the street. Mrs. Hargrove especially unsettled me. She stared too long during conversations, like she was constantly distracted by something behind you. The first night I moved in, she stopped me while I carried boxes inside. "Make sure your windows stay locked," she whispered. I smiled politely. "I will." But she grabbed my wrist before I walked away. Her voice dropped lower. Even the upstairs ones. That warning stayed in my head longer than it should have. Still, life inside the house felt normal for the first 2 weeks. School, work, sleep. Nothing strange happened until the footsteps started. The first time I heard them was around 1 a.m. Slow creaking sounds upstairs above my bedroom. At first, I assumed it was the house settling. Old homes make noise constantly. But the footsteps continued. Slow, measured, crossing the hallway directly above me, then stopping. I sat up listening carefully. Silence. Eventually, I convinced myself I imagined it. The next morning, I searched the upstairs rooms anyway. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken windows, no open doors, everything normal. But over the next few nights, more strange things happened. Cabinet doors left open, lights switched on, food missing from the refrigerator. Small things, easy things to explain away. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Then one evening after class, Mrs. Hargrove stopped me again outside. Her expression looked tense. "Someone's inside your house at night," she said quietly. I laughed nervously. "What?" "I've seen movement upstairs." Cold unease spread through my chest immediately. "What kind of movement?" Mrs. Hargrove glanced toward my second-floor windows. "Like someone walking room to room." I stared at her speechless. Then her husband suddenly interrupted from the porch. "Enough." His voice sounded sharp. Mrs. Hargrove immediately went silent after that. That night I checked every room carefully before bed. Closets, bathroom, under beds, nothing. Still, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since moving in. Around 2:30 a.m. I woke suddenly, not from noise, from the feeling someone stood nearby. The room felt different somehow, heavy. I opened my eyes slowly toward the dark corner beside my closet. At first I saw nothing. Then came breathing, soft, close, from somewhere inside the room. My heart nearly stopped. I grabbed my phone, immediately turning on the flashlight. The corner was empty. But the closet door now stood slightly open. I knew for a fact I closed it earlier. The breathing stopped instantly. Hands shaking, I climbed out of bed and pulled the closet open fully. Nothing inside, just clothes. But near the back wall, I noticed something strange. A small dark opening behind hanging jackets, too small to notice normally. I moved the clothes aside completely, and my stomach dropped. A narrow crawl space opened directly into the wall behind the closet. Large enough for a person to fit through. I slammed the closet shut immediately and called police. Officers searched the crawl space that night. At first, they found nothing. Then one of them discovered blankets hidden deeper inside the walls, along with empty food wrappers, water bottles, and photos. Dozens of photos, all of me, sleeping, cooking, watching TV, taken from inside the house. I nearly threw up. The police expanded the search into the attic above the second floor. That's where they finally found him. A man hiding between insulation and wooden beams. Thin, filthy, barefoot. He'd apparently lived inside the walls and attic for weeks, maybe longer. According to police, he entered through a broken attic vent before I moved in. At night, he crawled through the walls, watching me through small openings hidden inside the house, eating my food, walking around upstairs while I slept. The officer later told me something worse. The man carried a knife when they found him, and beside his sleeping area, they discovered a notebook. Most pages were filled with repeated sentences written over and over. "She hasn't noticed me yet." I moved out immediately afterward, but before leaving, I visited Mrs. Hargrove one final time. I asked how she knew someone was inside my house. The old woman looked toward my upstairs windows quietly. Then she answered, "Because years ago," her voice shook slightly, "someone lived inside ours too. That night in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep at all. Every creak made my chest tighten. Every shadow looked wrong. And even now, years later, I still check my closets before going to bed. Because sometimes when houses make noise at night, it isn't the house settling. The family next door never spoke, not once. No greetings, no conversations, no sounds of laughter or arguments. Nothing. At first, everyone on the street thought they were just private people. But eventually we realized something terrifying. The family next door wasn't supposed to be there at all. I moved into Ashwood Lane during the summer after getting married. Quiet suburban neighborhood, perfect lawns, kids riding bicycles every evening. The kind of place where neighbors waved while mowing their lawns. Our house sat beside a large two-story home that had supposedly been empty for years, at least according to our realtor. So when moving trucks suddenly appeared there 3 weeks after we arrived, nobody thought much about it. A family of 4 moved in, mother, father, 2 young children. But from the very beginning, something felt wrong about them. The parents never spoke to anyone, not even during introductions. Whenever neighbors waved, they simply stared silently before walking back inside. The children were stranger. We never saw them during daytime, only at night. Around midnight, the kids would appear standing in the front yard motionless beneath the porch light, not playing, not talking, just standing there together facing the street, perfectly still. My wife Hannah noticed it first. "Those kids creep me out," she whispered one evening while looking through our curtains. I glanced outside, Both children stood barefoot in their yard despite freezing temperatures. Neither moved, even after several minutes. Then, slowly, both kids turned simultaneously toward our house. I closed the curtains immediately. The longer the family lived there, the stranger things became. Their lights flickered constantly at night, bright one second, completely dark the next. Sometimes shadows moved across upstairs windows, even when no lights were on inside. And every few nights, we heard crying through the walls between our houses. Soft crying, like multiple voices whispering together. At first, we assumed it came from the children. But eventually, Hannah noticed something disturbing. The crying always stopped the moment we tried listening closely. Like whoever made the sounds knew we were paying attention. One night around 2 a.m., I woke suddenly thirsty. While walking downstairs, I noticed light coming from the kitchen window facing next door. The neighbor's house glowed brightly inside for the first time since they moved in. Every room illuminated. Something about it felt wrong immediately. Too bright, almost unnatural. Then I saw the family standing inside, all four of them, perfectly motionless in the living room, staring directly out the front window. Watching the street, I froze. None of them blinked. None of them moved. They just stood there, silently, side by side. Then, slowly, the father raised one hand toward me, inviting me closer. Cold fear shot through my chest instantly. I backed away from the window and hurried upstairs without looking outside again. The next morning, I finally spoke to another neighbor about them, Mrs. Calloway from across the street. The moment I mentioned the family, her face changed. "You've seen them too?" she whispered. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Calloway looked genuinely frightened now. "That house has been empty since the fire." Silence. "What fire?" She stared toward the neighboring home. 6 years ago, she whispered. "A family died there." I laughed nervously. "That's impossible. People live there now." Mrs. Calloway slowly shook her head. "No, they don't." The conversation disturbed me enough that I searched online later that evening, and I found the article. A house fire destroyed the property 6 years earlier. A family of 4 died inside, parents and 2 children. None escaped. The article included a photo of the victims. My blood turned ice cold, because the people in the photo were the same family living next door. That night, Hannah and I kept every curtain closed. Neither of us slept much. Then around 1:30 a.m., someone knocked on our front door. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I looked through the peephole carefully. One of the children stood outside alone, barefoot, pale, motionless beneath the porch light. Its face looked strangely dark around the eyes. Then slowly, the child smiled. Not normal smiling. Too wide, too unnatural. Hannah whispered behind me, "Don't open it." The child outside continued staring directly into the peephole. Then softly it spoke. "Can we come inside?" Its voice sounded wrong, like several people speaking at once underneath the words. Every light inside our house flickered instantly. Then the child tilted its head unnaturally sideways. A loud bang suddenly echoed from next door, then another, then screaming, real screaming. The neighboring house burst bright orange as flames erupted inside the upstairs windows. Hannah screamed. I rushed outside immediately. The entire house next door burned violently now. Fire poured through broken windows while smoke filled the night sky. Neighbors flooded into the street panicking. But through the flames, I saw them. The family standing motionless inside the upstairs window, watching us burn. The father slowly raised his hand again. Then the entire house went dark instantly. The fire vanished completely. No flames, no smoke, nothing. The house stood silent and empty beside ours. Neighbors stared in shock. Several people swore they saw the fire, too. Police arrived later that night but found no evidence of damage anywhere. The home remained abandoned exactly as records showed, empty for 6 years. Hannah and I moved out 2 weeks later, but before leaving, I looked toward the neighboring house one final time during our last night there. And in the upstairs window, the silent family still stood watching from the darkness. The security camera only glitched when my neighbor appeared. At first, I thought it was a technical issue. Cheap cameras freeze sometimes, signals cut out, static happens. But eventually, I realized something horrifying. The camera wasn't malfunctioning. It was trying to show me something impossible. I moved into the apartment complex during my 2nd year of college. The building sat downtown above a closed grocery store surrounded by narrow alleyways and flickering streetlights. Not exactly dangerous, just old. The hallways smelled faintly like mildew, and the elevators constantly broke down. Still, the rent was affordable. That was all I cared about. My apartment sat on the 6th floor directly across from apartment 612. That's where she lived. The woman everyone avoided. I never learned her real name. Tenants simply called her the hallway neighbor, because nobody ever saw her anywhere except outside her apartment door. Standing, watching. The first time I noticed her was around midnight while taking trash downstairs. She stood motionless in the hallway facing my apartment, tall, thin, long black hair hanging over part of her face. At first, I assumed she was waiting for someone. I nodded politely while passing. She didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't move. She just watched me silently until the elevator doors closed. The next morning, I mentioned her casually to another tenant, a guy named Marcus from downstairs. The moment I described her, he looked uncomfortable. "You talked to her?" "Not really." Marcus lowered his voice. "Don't." That answer bothered me immediately. But over the next few weeks, I started noticing more strange things. Every night around 3 a.m., she stood outside her apartment again, always facing my door, sometimes for hours, completely motionless. The building security cameras constantly malfunctioned on our floor too. Hallway footage corrupted almost nightly between 3 and 4 a.m. Management blamed old wiring. But nobody really believed that. Then one morning I found scratches near my front door, long thin marks across the wood near the handle. At first I assumed vandalism, until I noticed they formed words. "Let me in." My stomach tightened instantly. That same day, I bought my own security camera, a small motion-activated device facing the hallway outside my apartment, mostly for peace of mind. The first 2 nights showed nothing unusual, empty hallway, occasional neighbors walking past. Then came night 3. At exactly 3:03 a.m., the camera activated. I watched the footage the next morning while drinking coffee. The hallway appeared empty initially. Then static distorted the screen briefly, and suddenly, she was standing directly outside my apartment. No footsteps, no elevator sounds. One frame empty. Next frame, her face inches from my door. I paused the video immediately. Her appearance looked worse up close. Skin unnaturally pale, eyes almost completely black beneath the hallway lights. And her mouth. Her mouth hung slightly open like she was whispering something silently. The footage continued. She slowly raised one hand toward my doorknob. Then the video glitched violently. Static consumed the screen for several seconds. When the image returned, the hallway was empty again. I barely slept that night. Around 2:50 a.m., I sat awake watching the live camera feed on my phone. Nothing moved outside. Then suddenly the screen flickered with static again, and there she was, standing outside my apartment, watching the camera directly. I froze. Then slowly, she smiled. The feed cut out immediately afterward. A second later, something knocked softly on my front door. 3 slow taps, tap, tap, tap. I didn't move. Another knock followed, then silence. My phone buzzed suddenly with a motion alert from the camera. Hands shaking, I opened the app again. The hallway camera now showed my apartment door slightly open. Cold panic hit me instantly, because I knew I locked it. Then movement appeared inside the apartment on camera. A dark figure slowly crossing my living room. My blood turned ice cold. I grabbed a kitchen knife immediately and checked the apartment room by room. Nothing. No broken windows, no open doors. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. My bedroom closet now stood open. Inside, hanging from one of the shirts, was a long strand of black hair. The next morning, I went directly to building management demanding answers. The manager became strangely quiet when I mentioned apartment 612. Then she finally admitted something disturbing. Nobody lives there. I stared at her. What? That apartment's been empty almost a year. The room suddenly felt colder. That woman across the hall. There is no tenant in 612. I showed her the camera footage immediately. Her face drained of color while watching it, especially the part where the woman appeared after the static. The manager called police. They searched apartment 612 that afternoon. The place looked abandoned, dust everywhere, disconnected electricity, rotting furniture left behind. But inside the bedroom, police found hundreds of printed photographs taped across the walls. Photos of tenants sleeping inside their apartments, including me. Most were taken through windows, some were taken inside bedrooms, and in every photo, a blurry pale figure stood nearby watching. Then one officer noticed something strange about the closet wall. A hidden maintenance crawl space connected directly between several apartments, including mine. I moved out that same night. Before leaving, I deleted the security camera app completely. But weeks later, I restored the footage one final time, and that's when I noticed something I missed before. During the static glitches, For a split second, the camera showed her standing inside my apartment behind me, watching while I slept. Every night at exactly midnight, my neighbor started digging. Not gardening, not landscaping. Digging. Deep. At first we thought he was building something. But then the screaming started coming from underground, and after that, nobody on our street slept again. I lived in a rural neighborhood outside Blackwood County, where houses sat far apart, separated by woods and empty fields. Quiet place, almost isolated. Most neighbors kept to themselves, including Mr. Turner. The old man who lived behind our property. Turner had always been strange, even before the digging. He rarely spoke to anyone and almost never left his house during daytime. But every night after dark, lights appeared in his backyard, while metallic clanging echoed through the woods behind our homes. Nobody paid much attention initially. People in rural areas do weird projects all the time. Then one night, my younger Caleb saw him digging. We were watching TV around midnight when Caleb glanced out the kitchen window. There's someone outside. I looked toward the backyard. A lantern glowed faintly near the tree line behind Turner's house, and beside it, Mr. Turner shoveled dirt into a massive hole, slowly, methodically. The hole already looked enormous, at least 8 feet deep. "What the hell is he doing?" Caleb whispered. I shrugged, but something about the scene unsettled me immediately. Turner moved strangely, jerky, almost twitching between motions, and every few minutes he stopped digging to stare directly into the woods behind him, like he expected something to emerge from the darkness. The digging continued nightly after that. Always midnight, always the same routine. Lantern, shovel, silence. Then came the screams. The first time we heard them, Mom thought an animal got trapped somewhere underground. The sound echoed faintly through the woods around 2 a.m., high-pitched, human, like someone screaming from far below the earth. Dad went outside with a flashlight immediately. The screaming thing stopped the second he stepped onto the porch. The next morning, Dad confronted Turner about it. I watched from our yard while they spoke near the fence line. Turner looked exhausted up close, paler than usual, dark circles under his eyes. Dad later told us Turner blamed coyotes, but Dad clearly didn't believe him, neither did anyone else. Because over the next week, the screams kept happening, always late at night, always near Turner's backyard. Then the smell started, rotting, wet, like dead animals left in the sun. The odor spread across the neighborhood strong enough that several people called animal control, but nobody found anything. Meanwhile, Turner became increasingly paranoid. He nailed boards over his windows, installed floodlights everywhere, and constantly glanced toward the woods like something watched him from between the trees. One evening, Caleb came running into the house, terrified. "I saw something," he whispered. Dad frowned. "What, in Turner's backyard?" Caleb's face looked genuinely pale now. Something climbed out of the hole. Silence filled the room immediately. Dad clearly thought Caleb imagined it, but Caleb wouldn't back down. "It was pale," he insisted, "and crawling." That night, Dad decided to investigate himself. Against Mom's protests, he grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the fence line around midnight, while Caleb and I watched from the upstairs window. Turner's lantern already glowed near the massive hole. But this time, Turner wasn't digging. He stood frozen beside the pit, staring downward. Dad called out toward him. No response. Then suddenly Turner backed away from the hole quickly, terrified. Dad aimed his flashlight toward the pit and immediately froze too. Even from our window, I saw the beam shaking violently. Then the screaming erupted again, louder than ever, coming directly from inside the hole. Dad stumbled backward instantly, and something pale moved upward from the darkness below. At first it looked human, then it climbed higher. Its limbs bent wrong, too long, too thin. Its skin looked gray beneath the lantern light, and its head twitched unnaturally side to side while climbing out of the pit. Turner screamed. The creature suddenly lunged toward the woods, unbelievably fast, crawling on all fours. Dad sprinted back toward the house immediately. I'd never seen him terrified before that night. He locked every door and window without speaking, then finally whispered, "We're leaving tomorrow." None of us argued, but around 3 a.m., we heard knocking at the back door. Slow, heavy, knock, knock, knock. Dad checked the peephole carefully. Then his face drained of color instantly. "What?" Mom whispered. Dad didn't answer. He simply backed away from the door slowly. Then we heard Turner's voice outside. "Please let me in." Except something sounded wrong about it. The voice repeated too perfectly. Same tone, same pauses, same breathing, like a recording replaying. Then scratching dragged across the back door. Scratch! Long nails scraping wood. Caleb started crying immediately. The voice outside continued, "Please let me in." Then came another voice from farther away in the woods, also sounding exactly like Turner. Then another, different directions, same voice. Dad turned off every light in the house. We stayed silent until sunrise. The knocking eventually stopped sometime before dawn. The next morning, police searched Turner's property. The hole in his backyard connected to tunnel system running beneath several abandoned properties nearby. But they found no sign of Turner anywhere. No body, no blood, nothing. Only one strange thing remained near the tunnel entrance. Bare, human footprints leading out of the woods, mixed with something else. Much larger tracks beside them. We moved away that same week. But sometimes late at night, I still wake up hearing slow digging sounds outside my bedroom window. The woman across the hall never left her apartment. Not once. For 3 straight months, I never saw her step outside. At first, I barely noticed. People keep to themselves in city apartment buildings. That's normal. But eventually, the crying started. And after that, everything became terrifying. I moved into the building after transferring colleges during my junior year. Old city apartment complex. Narrow hallways, buzzing fluorescent lights, thin walls. The kind of place where you constantly heard neighbors arguing, televisions playing, or footsteps overhead. My apartment sat directly across from Unit 307. That was her apartment. The woman living there looked young, maybe late 20s, pale skin, dark hair, always wearing the same oversized grey sweater. I first saw her during move-in day. She stood quietly inside her doorway watching me carry boxes upstairs. Not helping, not speaking, just staring silently. When I smiled politely, she slowly closed the door without saying a word. Something about that interaction bothered me immediately, but I ignored it. Over the next several weeks, I noticed more strange things. Her door never fully opened, only cracked slightly whenever food deliveries arrived. She only seemed active at night, and every evening around 2 a.m., I heard crying through the hallway walls. Soft at first, then louder over time. Not normal crying either. It sounded desperate, almost painful, like someone begging quietly between sobs. One night, I finally knocked on her door. The crying stopped instantly. Silence filled the hallway. Then slowly, the door cracked open a few inches. One dark eye stared through the gap. "You okay?" I asked carefully. Several seconds passed before she answered. "Don't open it." Her voice sounded shaky. Confused, I frowned. "Open what?" The woman's breathing suddenly became uneven. Then she whispered, "Don't let it inside," and slammed the door shut. I stood frozen in the hallway. That should have been enough for me to contact someone, but I convinced myself she was mentally ill. Maybe paranoid, maybe dangerous. Still, the atmosphere around apartment 307 grew increasingly disturbing afterward. Lights flickered constantly near her unit. The hallway temperature felt colder there somehow. And every few nights, I heard whispering through the walls, multiple voices speaking softly all at once. Then came the notes. The first appeared beneath my apartment door one morning. A small, folded piece of paper. 3 words written shakily in black ink. "Don't open it." No signature. No explanation. I assumed the woman left it. Then another note appeared 2 nights later. "This building isn't safe." The handwriting looked worse this time, Messier. Almost frantic. I finally contacted building management after that. The manager rolled his eyes the moment I mentioned apartment 307. "She bothering tenants again? What's wrong with her?" I asked. The manager hesitated. Then, quietly admitted, police had been called to her apartment multiple times over the years because of noise complaints and reports of screaming. But they never find anything. That answer didn't help, especially after the hallway cameras started failing. Every night between 2 and 3 a.m., security footage outside apartment 307 glitched into static. Maintenance blamed old wiring. But residents on our floor started noticing other things too. Footsteps in empty hallways, doors opening alone, whispering through vents. Then one night around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to screaming, real screaming, coming from apartment 37. Furniture crashing, crying, a woman begging loudly, "Please stop!" I ran into the hallway immediately along with several neighbors. The screaming continued inside the apartment violently. Then suddenly, silence. Complete silence. Someone called police. Officers arrived within minutes and forced the apartment door open. I'll never forget what happened next. The apartment was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no food, no clothes, nothing. Dust covered the floors thick enough to show no footprints anywhere inside, except for one thing: the bedroom walls. Every wall was covered with writing scratched directly into the paint. "Don't let it inside," repeated hundreds of times, some written so deeply they cut through drywall. Police searched the apartment for hours. Nobody understood how someone could be living there. Especially after building records revealed something terrifying. Unit 307 had been officially vacant for nearly 4 years. The woman supposedly living there died in the apartment years earlier after a reported suicide. I refused to believe it. Until the officer showed me the old tenant photo from building records. Same grey sweater, same pale face, same woman. I moved out the next morning. But before leaving, I checked the hallway security footage one final time. The camera outside apartment 307 glitched heavily around 2:31 a.m. as usual. Then, for one split second, the static cleared, and the woman stood directly behind me in the hallway, smiling, while something tall and dark watched from inside my apartment doorway.